Great to be here. Seem to be echoing. I used to hang out not too far from here on Canal Street, where I would buy something about this big. It was a telephone really for $50. They could actually switch a bit of information. And I was excited in 1968 that I could buy a transistor for $1 that did the same thing. And today you can get several billion of them for $1. And I'll talk a little bit more about that exponential trend. But how many of you are familiar with the TV game Jeopardy? Okay, so tell me if you can get this Jeopardy query. The current president of the United States, who raise your hand if you think you could respond to that. Okay, so who is Barack Obama? Who is Barack Obama? So you seem to be pretty good at this game. How about this one? A long, tiresome speech delivered by a frothy pie topping. The answer is, what is a meringue harangue? How about this one? A garment worn by a child, perhaps aboard an operatic ship. You got it. What is a pinafore? Anyway, Watson, the IBM computer, got these correct, and the two best human players in the world got them wrong. Watson also made some stupid mistakes, but Watson got a higher score than the best two human players put together. And this is not a narrow task. It involves understanding pretty subtle forms of language, metaphors, puns, similes, jokes, and involves having some command of all of human knowledge. And the knowledge that Watson has was not hand-programmed by the scientists in some language like Lisp. Watson actually got that by reading Wikipedia and several other encyclopedias, 200 million pages of natural language documents. And it can kind of go through all of that in 3 seconds and respond to these queries. I made a prediction in the early 80s that by 98, a computer would take the World Chess Championship. And I also predicted that when that happened, we would immediately dismiss chess as being of any importance. And both of those things happened then in 97. Deep Blue defeated Kasparov, and people said, nah, it's not a big deal. Of course, a computer can play a good game of chess. It's a logic game. Computers are logic machines. That's to be expected, but what they will never do is understand the vagaries, subtleties, ambiguities of human language. That is the unique sort of province of human intelligence. Alan Turing based his test as to how you can tell if a computer is operating at human levels based on human language. So this is a pretty significant milestone, that a computer can actually master this language-based game, which is filled with these kind of very subtle forms of language. So AI, which is maybe another word for Juan Enrique's big data, really getting intelligence out of all the information that's out there in the world, is getting some real traction. It's an interesting observation on human behavior that when I make these predictions, I predicted systems like Siri and Google Now, the Google self-driving cars in my 1999 book, that these would emerge around 2009, 2010, and people thought that was nuts. Now that it happens, people just shrug their shoulder and figure they've always been around. I mean, this is how technology evolves. When something first is introduced, like Siri, people say, it's not a big deal, it doesn't really work that well. It's making all these mistakes. A few years later, it works really well, and then people say, it's not a big deal. That's been out for years. But we're making exponential gains in both hardware and software. I'd like to touch on that. In the interest of time, I won't say much about exponential growth, to the relief of those of you who've heard me speak before, but it's hard to avoid the concept because our intuition about the future is not exponential, it's linear. When we walked through the fields 1,000 years ago, we said, okay, that animal's going that way, I'm going this way in the path, we're going to meet up at that rock, I think I'll go a different way. It turned out to be good for survival, these predictors of the future got hardwired in our brains. That's why we have a brain, is to predict the future, to anticipate the consequences of our actions and inaction. But those built-in predictors are linear. We assume that animal is going to keep going at the same speed. That was a good assumption. But the progression of information technology is exponential. And I'll say just a word about what that means. But here's what I wanted to cover today. Any questions on any of this? Okay, since there are no questions, I'll keep going. Well, this is worth looking at. What is the difference between linear and exponential progressions? Linear progressions go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's our intuition. At step 30, you're at 30. Exponential progressions go 2, 4, 8, 16. Doesn't sound that different. But at step 30, you're at 1 billion. And it's not an idle speculation about the future. I mean, this is several billion times more powerful than the computer I used as a student per dollar. It's 100,000 times smaller. We'll do both of those things again in the next 25 years, which gives you some idea of what will be feasible. So this was the first graph like that I encountered, that I came up with in 1981. I was looking at a way to time my inventions because I realized the world would be a different place by the time I finished the project. This is a logarithmic scale. As you go up the scale, we're multiplying by powers of 10. So every level on this is 100,000 times greater than the level below it. So this is computers. It's a measure of the power of computers. Calculations per second per constant dollar since the 1890 census. And there's been trillions-fold increase, several billion-fold just since I was a student. But what's interesting is look at how smooth and predictable a trajectory that is. It's not just Moore's Law. Moore's Law is just the part on the right. They were shrinking vacuum tubes in the 1950s, using relays in the 1940s. You don't see World War I, World War II, the Great Depression, the Cold War, any of the things that happened on this graph. It's just a very inexorable progression. People say, well, it must have slowed down during the recent recession. No, it had no effect on it, any more than the Great Depression did. And this is what enables these changes. And it turns out that software is progressing in the same way that hardware is progressing. So I don't dwell on these examples of electronics, but this is the cost of a transistor, 1 per dollar in 1968, several billion per dollar today. They're actually better because they're smaller, so therefore they're faster. The cost of a transistor cycle has come down by half every year. That's a 50% deflation rate. Some of that goes into better performance. Some of it goes into lower prices. That's why you can buy an iPhone that's twice as good as the one 2 years ago for the same cost. And where this is headed is for smarter and smarter machines. It's also affecting biology. The Human Genome Project was exponential. So an example of linear thinking is halfway through that 15-year project, 1% of the genome had been collected. So mainstream scientists declared the project a failure. Okay, 1%, 7 years, it's going to take 700 years, just like we said. My reaction was, oh, we've done 1%, we're almost done. Because it's an exponential trajectory. 1% is only 7 doublings away from 100%. And indeed, that's what happened. It continued to double every year, was finished 7 years later. And we are now actually reprogramming biology. It's a whole different paradigm for health and medicine. And if we had more, maybe during the discussion, we'll have more to say about that. But that's going to revolutionize health and medicine. It's also going to revolutionize physical things. If I want to send you a movie, a music album, a book, just 2 years ago, I would send you a Federal Express package. Today, I can send you an email attachment, and you can turn it into those products. But I can also send you an email attachment with a violin or a guitar, and you could print it out. These are actual guitars and violins that were printed out on the three-dimensional printer. And these are progressing exponentially. The resolution's getting finer at a rate of 100 in 3D volume per decade. The costs are coming down rapidly. This is kind of the quiet right before the storm, but we're going to begin to do personal manufacturing with very inexpensive 3D printers very soon. With your 3D printer today, you can print out 70% of the parts you need to print out another three-dimensional printer. And that will be 100% within 5 years. So I've been thinking about thinking for 50 years. I actually wrote a paper 50 years ago when I was 14 about the nature of human intelligence, which I said was based on recognizing patterns, that that's what we do really well. We're not very good at logical thinking. Even back then, 50 years ago, computers were better at logical thinking than we were. And I developed a program that could analyze patterns and musical melodies and then write original music. So if I fed in Chopin, it would actually compose original music that would sound like it was a student of Chopin. And I got to play that on a national TV program, I've Got a Secret, which I know is before all of your time, but that was a show back when there were just 3 networks. And I still have the same view in this book now, that the human brain, particularly the neocortex, which is 80% of the brain, it's where we do our thinking, is basically a big pattern recognizer, specifically 300 million of them. And I describe how this works in the brain, but our ability to actually see inside a brain now has also been progressing exponentially. These are charts on different types of brain scanning. These are logarithmic scales. Basically, we're doubling the precision, the spatial resolution of brain scanning every year. We're doubling the amount of data we're getting. We're doubling the size and scale of brain simulations. Every aspect of this project to reverse engineer the brain is scaling up in an exponential manner. And there's 3 reasons to reverse engineer, which means to understand the brain. I mean, one is to do a better job of fixing it. Things like the Parkinson's disease neural implant, which is put inside the body, connected into the brain, is treating the brain as a network and not just a chemical soup, which is what drugs like SSRI drugs do. It'll provide us better insight into ourselves, which is the overarching goal of the arts and sciences since we've had art and science. And it will provide us biologically inspired methods to create intelligent machines. And this is actually already happening. A lot of the methods used in Watson, in fact, are very similar to the mathematics of what the human brain does, which is to build up ideas and concepts, patterns, if you will, in a hierarchical fashion. So let me quickly describe how this works. And we have 300 million little pattern recognizers. So I have a number that recognize the crossbar and a capital A, and that's really all it cares about. A pretty girl can walk by, a beautiful song can play, it doesn't care. But when it sees a crossbar and a capital A, it gets very excited and fires, wow, crossbar. And that goes up to a higher level, another pattern recognizer that's getting that input, as well as other primitive feature detectors, and goes, capital A, and it fires with a high probability. And that goes to a higher level that might go, the printed word apple. In another part of the visual cortex, there might be a recognizer that goes, an actual apple. In the auditory cortex, there might be one that fires and says, oh, somebody just said apple. Go up another 20 levels, and it's now sitting at a very high point of a hierarchy, and below it, it's getting input from the visual system, the auditory system, the olfactory system, and it smells a certain perfume, it sees a certain fabric, it hears a certain voice, and goes, aha, my friend just entered the room. Go up another 20 levels, and you've got a pattern recognizer that might say, oh, she's pretty, that was ironic, that's funny. Good timing. Something fell on the floor. So you probably think that those high-level pattern recognizers, beauty, humor, are much more complicated than the ones that just recognize the edge of an object or crossbar and a capital A, but they're actually the same, except that the high-level ones are just sitting in a different position in that grand hierarchy. I talk about in the book this girl who had brain surgery, and she was conscious. You can be conscious during brain surgery because there are no pain receptors in the brain. And whenever the surgeons triggered a particular spot in her neocortex, she would laugh. And they thought maybe they're triggering some laugh reflex, but they quickly discovered, no, they're actually triggering the perception of humor. She just found everything hilarious whenever they triggered this spot. You guys are so funny, just standing there was a typical remark. And these guys were not funny. So now she obviously has more than one spot that recognizes humor. We have tremendous redundancy in general. I've got lots of pattern recognizers that recognize a crossbar and a capital A. But they're all organized in this grand hierarchy. So where does this hierarchy come from? We're not born with it. The subtitle of the book is The Secret of Human Thought Revealed, and that is the secret. The neocortex recognizes these patterns that it actually sees in its own experience, and then wires itself up in this hierarchy. So I have a 1-year-old grandson now, and he's already laid down several layers of this hierarchy. We can actually learn one conceptual level at a time. That's why it takes a long time to get up to high-level concepts like irony, and many civilizations actually never got to understanding irony, which is unfortunate. But so we create this. Our brain creates our thoughts create our brain. We can actually see this on brain scans. And all of these recognizers are the same. Some of the best evidence for that came out just as I was sending the book out. For example, what happens to the visual cortex, which is this region that processes visual information? Actually, V1, particular region that's the first region, handles the lowest level patterns in visual images, like the crossbar on a capital A or the edge of an object. What happens to that in a congenitally blind person who's not getting any visual information? It actually gets taken over by the frontal cortex, which deals with high-level language concepts like beauty and irony, to help it with those high-level concepts, showing that these low-level pattern recognizers are actually the same thing. They're capable of handling high or low-level features, as the case may be. It just depends on where they actually wire themselves to be in this hierarchy. That's why you can learn a new skill that might be wiped out in a stroke or a brain accident. You actually learn it with another region of the neocortex. So to relate this to Juan's point about immortality, I take a somewhat different tack on that. We are reprogramming our biochemistry, and we're using our intelligence to do that. We're already smarter than we used to be because we are merged with our technology. I mean, this device on my belt makes me smarter. I felt like a part of my brain went on strike during that one-day SOPA strike. And ultimately, they will go inside our bodies and brains because shrinking in size is another exponential progression, but I think that's a distinction without a difference. Even if they're outside our bodies, they are extensions of who we are. But as we actually learn how the neocortex works, how the intelligence really functions, we can use those as biologically inspired to create machines that will match human intelligence. I've been very consistent at predicting 2029 as a point where computers will match human intelligence in the ways that humans are superior today, and then combine that with a tremendous scale of computers. And remember, Watson actually does not do as good a job as you would reading one page of Wikipedia, but it read 200 million pages, something you and I can't do, and has total recall on all that information. So that's going to be a very powerful combination, but it's not an alien invasion of intelligent machines to compete with us and displace us. We create these tools to extend our reach. Ever since we couldn't reach fruit in a higher branch, we created a tool to extend our physical reach. We already extend our mental reach. We will make ourselves smarter by combining with this technology. That's the only way we could keep up, actually, with the exponential growth of knowledge itself. And one of the things that we're going to be able to do is improve our own health. We're already doing that. And we will also be able to back up our mind file, which is actually a frightening thing that we can't do that today. I'm upset when somebody tells me they're not backing up their notebook computer or their phone. A friend of mine actually just recently lost a novel because her notebook was stolen off a train. But generally speaking, non-biological intelligence is backed up. But we do have very important information. It's not a metaphor in our brains that, which is basically this whole hierarchy I told you about, and the patterns in each of those recognizers. That's actual data. We ultimately will be able to capture it, back it up, restore it if we need to, actually expand our thinking in the cloud. That's where we're headed. You know, consider that if you do something interesting with this, like a search, translate a language, ask Siri or Google now a question, it doesn't take place in this box. It goes out to the cloud. Ultimately, everything is going to take place in the cloud. This is a gateway to the cloud. We will put gateways to the cloud in our brains. So 300 million pattern recognizers, is that a big number or a little? It was big compared to other mammals. Only mammals have a neocortex. It was the enabling factor that permitted the evolution of language and art and science and invention. So it was big from that perspective, but it's also very limiting. We might want to have 1 billion or 10 billion or 100 billion pattern recognizers for 3 seconds, just like you might use a million computers for 3 seconds when you're doing a complex search. We'll have that opportunity by putting gateways to the cloud inside our brains. That's a 2030 scenario, but that's where we're headed. Is that a form of immortality? Maybe that's, you know, the combination of tattoos and big data, I think, was a very good metaphor for what I'm talking about. Thank you very much.